Hello and welcome. My name is Marcus Warner.
And my name is Rory Sherman.
And in this video we are going to be showing you how to compose orchestral music, from initial concept all the way through to final distribution using a home studio, a few musically inclined friends, and many, many cups of tea. Now straight off the bat we have ourselves a little bit of a conundrum, because the title of this video is How to Make an Orchestral Album, and the reality is that I have never worked with an orchestra in my entire life, and I've only ever seen one perform live maybe 3 or 4 times. So what qualifies me as being able to teach you anything whatsoever about this? Let's start at the beginning. It doesn't take much to be able to brand yourself as a music composer these days. According to the Wikipedia definition, the word itself actually comes from the Latin word compono, which means one who puts together, and is a musician who is an author of music in any form. Now I don't know about you, but already I'm seeing a little bit of a paradox there, because I've heard some pretty music in my time, and based on the fact that it specifies music in any form, it means that even a recording of Rory scratching his backside for 10 minutes technically counts as music, regardless of whether or not he is in fact a musician. If you can record 2 audio files separately and then play them back at the same time, you are, by definition, a music composer. So welcome to the club, everybody. But in all seriousness, to do it reasonably well does take some practice. In my case, it's been an accumulation of more than 10 years seriously studying, practicing and composing music. But even before then, for a few years, I was playing the piano. Rory and I were actually in a duo band throughout school together.
Indeed we were, very much so.
The Floorboards, which was a very good time. But it wasn't until seeing How to Train Your Dragon in 2009 that I realised I wanted to do it full time. Fast forward to today, and the current situation, fingers crossed, is that I'm receiving enough income from Spotify and Apple and all those other online places to sustain myself and continue making music. This has culminated in Reprise EP, which to date has got to be one of the most intensive projects I've ever taken on, and involved collaborating with more musicians per track than ever before. Added to the fact that it required going back and studying some of my music from 7 years ago, and you have yourself a fairly full-on experience, which has proven to be quite educational, at least for me. But why is this important? Why should you care? Well, the reality is that with the miracle of modern technology, you can get started composing in an instant. There's programs out there that will write ostinatos for you, and people are giving away drum loops and MIDI regions and chord progressions. And it's very easy to throw a few quid into a music project and have it come out sounding decent, even if you've got no prior experience. But there's so much more to it than that. So many little nuances when working with this technology, mostly in the pursuit of making it sound like a real orchestra, that we believe showing you this process from start to finish will help you far more than any other resource out there. Yes, there's big studio documentaries and behind the scenes DVDs which show you how music is put to film, but they've all got AAA list composers working with Hollywood budgets and a full orchestra at their disposal. And even in the more grounded world of working in television, most of the composers you see on there, they've had years to establish themselves in the industry. And even if they're looking back retrospectively, it's not very often that you see that industry from the perspective of someone who's just starting out in their career, whatever that career might be. And I think this is important, because I expect many people out there watching are in a very similar position to my own. You're just getting started, trying to make a name for yourself. Well, don't worry, because we're here to help.
That's worrying.
So without further ado, Rory and I are going to take you through the makings of this album, the creative process in general, and show you how a few musicians, fresh out of university for the most part, can work together to make something that sounds like this. I should mention before we begin that I've actually put all the parts and time codes down in the video description, so if you want to skip a bit or you'd like to rewatch any part, they'll all be there for you to choose from. We're going to start with the most basic things first, and then we're going to work our way through the makings of the album. So the most obvious thing is, where are we? Well, we're in the southwest of England in a fairly small town in rural Somerset. reason I mention this is because I want to address a certain myth which I've heard quite a few times, which is in order to make it in this industry, you have to be where the action is. So LA, New York, London. I disagree. Yes, you will benefit from showing your faces at events and being able to meet up with potential clients more easily, because making an actual face-to-face interaction, it does certainly help your relationship with them. But I don't want anyone to feel like they're going to be in a rut because they're in the middle of nowhere. I've lived in a really tiny village for most of my life, at least as far as I know. It hasn't affected my music negatively too much. You are at a little bit of a disadvantage, yes, but it's not as big as some people would have you believe, so don't worry about that first of all. I mean, as you can hear, this place isn't exactly perfect. We've got a lot of road noise outside. It's not exactly what you call a great recording environment. But the thing is, for me personally, there's nothing that I would rather have, because it's a pleasant place to be. Now, you remember the typical music studios back at sixth form and that we've been in for recording sessions. They have like wires trailing everywhere, soundproofing.
It felt very stifling and very cramped and not very... I like how you can go from here to your kitchen, to your dining room. It feels more at home.
I need natural light, I need plants, I need a window that I can open and let some fresh air in. The most important thing is to make a space that you personally feel as comfortable as possible recording in or making music in. Next, we're going to talk about gear. Now, people like to talk about gear on YouTube these days. Very often you hear this idea that you don't need any gear whatsoever, whilst at the same time being shown thousands of pounds worth of equipment. I'm not going to sit here and fib and say that it doesn't make any difference. It does make life easier, but, and this is the big but, and I don't think many people actually say this specifically, but you cannot use lack of gear as an excuse for not making something. I want to be very transparent about what we're working with here and make it clear that, you know, I haven't just started out with, this isn't all taking place with one laptop. But for the first few years it did, and it's only more recently that I've started to accumulate more items, which has gone hand in hand with the fact that I'm now being able to sustain myself from my music making. But we made it work.
We did actually. It was good fun, certainly.
Roll the tape. This is the desk setup, and I suppose if we're talking about the desk setup, we should probably start with the most important thing, which is, of course, the desk. In this case, my dad and I built this desk last year using reclaimed wood. We bought these legs off of eBay and hacksawed it down to make this shelf, which is about the same height as the keyboard. We also made it so that it's very easy to take apart and put back together, so that when I move house, it's not, you know, it's not like a sofa, it can be moved pretty easily. Next most important thing after that will be the computer. So this is a 2017 iMac Pro. It's got 64 gigabytes of RAM, and I went for the 2 terabyte solid state drive, the internal storage. I've got 2 external solid state drives, so external storage. They're both connected to this Kali Digits Thunderbolt port hub thing, which basically connects all of my hard drives and powers them all. I also have this keyboard connected to it. This is powered by it, and I think the headphone amplifier goes into it as well. All of that is connected and wired in underneath the shelf here, so you can't see any of the wires. And then basically there's only 3 cables coming up to the Mac. I've never seen anybody using one of these hub things to be the center of a music setup before. But I found it online and thought I'd give it a go, and so far I've had it about 1.5 years and it's been working really well. The second monitor next to it is actually my mum's TV, which she used to have in the bedroom, but she didn't really use it anymore, so she allowed me to commandeer it. The speakers are actually a gift from my aunt. They used to be part of a record player. I got rid of the record player a few years back and just replaced it with a simple amplifier, which I keep down here. I didn't know it was going to fit underneath the shelf so well, that just sort of happened, but it's perfect. I think I bought that on eBay for about £25. I've had it all the way through uni. It's had all manner of things spilled on it and dust, and it's been under the bed, and it's still working like a charm, so I'm really happy with that purchase, to say the least. And then more recently I upgraded my headphones. So I used to have Audio-Technica ATH M50s, which for the price of around, I think, £100, £200, you know, by far and away the best headphones you can buy. But more recently I upgraded to something that was open back, so a little bit better soundstage, and that's these Oppo PM2 headphones. Very good quality, but also quite pleasant to listen to as well, because when you get into high-end monitoring headphones, they can get a bit clinical after a while. I power them with this amplifier here, so this is an Odyssey Decard. It might be a bit surplus to requirements because I don't really think it's doing anything that the £25 amplifier couldn't do. So I might replace that in the near future, but for the time being it does make the sound, like, it's a noticeable difference when you've got the headphones just powered by a phone, say, and then you put them into an actual amplifier. Oh, it's night and day. Keyboard is a Yamaha P105. It was a gift from my mum for an 18th birthday present. I've had it now, well, I'm 23, so that's 5 years. And again, other than a few keys being a bit clattery, that works perfectly. Unlike a MIDI keyboard, it still has weighted keys, and also it's got its own speakers. So if I want to just noodle around on the keyboard and make up something, I don't need to open up Logic and kind of prepare it all. I can just put the volume up and play it. So that's very nice. But then when I'm playing a solo instrument like a horn or a violin and I want that dynamic control and the vibrato control, that kind of thing, I use this MIDI controller here. So this is an Icon Platform X, and I don't really understand these things, to be honest, because to me they don't really seem to be doing very much. They seem like quite simple devices, and yet they are ridiculously expensive. It does a good job, but it just seems like, for what it's doing, why? But yeah, okay, so I think that's about everything. Let's go through and look at the equipment next door. So this is my equipment room slash laundry room slash dressing room, whatever you want to call it. I keep my tripods, my mic stands, and my light stands over in this little corner here. Just so they're easy to kind of just pick one up and grab it if I need it for anything. Keep all my paperwork up here, and then I've got my instruments and musical stuff sort of littered around. So these are all my wind instruments. Got my hulusi, duduk from Armenia, my Irish whistle. This is my Pride and Joy, the low D, so it's this nice mellow sound. Got my two microphones on the top shelf because they're easy access. This one is the Shure SM57, which is pretty much the first microphone you should get because everyone unanimously agrees. They can be used for everything, they do a decent enough job, and they're basically indestructible. This is a Rode NT1A. It came with a little pop shield and the cage and everything. It's not too expensive, it's not cheap, but it is good quality. And because it's a condenser microphone as opposed to the Shure, which is a dynamic microphone, it's got a much more sensitive diaphragm and it picks up background noise a lot more easily, but it's got a lot more clarity, much better quality, better for vocals and for lighter, quieter instruments. So excluding the lav mic that I'm wearing, those are the only two microphones that I've had and have had for the past 5-6 years, even longer in fact. So I connect them to the computer using the simplest audio interface. This thing is absolutely hilarious. So I bought this back when I bought the Rode, and I blew all of my savings on that microphone and had no money for an interface. Back then I didn't realise you need an interface. So I bought this thing because it was the cheapest one I could find on Amazon. I think it was something like £35. I thought I might replace it at some point, but the years have gone by and this thing soldiers on. And it does the job. It connects the microphone to the computer, gives it sufficient power, it comes through fairly clearly and there's no noise, like hissing or anything like that. And yeah, I highly recommend it. This is a Behringer Xenix 302. Great purchase. Let's move down. Got wires, got headphones. I mentioned the ATH M50s. They're here. I still use them for mastering, just to check up on the tracks, and also for when we're recording, because they're closed back, they don't let sound escape so easily, so it's better for a clean recording. Bigger instruments down here, so we've got the mini harp, which again was another junk shop purchase, which a lot of my instruments are. This thing makes an absolutely fantastic sound. And we use this in the start of To Build an Army, so. Great instrument. Underneath that we've got a cornet. Jim gave that to me about 7 or 8 years ago, and he said it's on loan and he's going to want it back at some point. Jim, if you're watching this, do you want it back? I mean, because by this point now it's kind of like, it's getting a bit ridiculous. 2 kalimbas. Sorry, they're not actually technically called kalimbas, they're actually called mbiras, but nice just to have around. They've got the little holes on the back. Anyway, I didn't actually use those on Reprise EP, so I don't know why I'm telling you this. I did, however, use the mandolin, and I do use this quite a lot. Is that a spider on it? I use this on a lot of the tracks, again for the same reasons which I use most of the live instruments. I don't play it very well at all. I only know about 4 chords, so the real basic. But the thing is, just having that in the piece, the little bit of rhythm which you can hear, you don't need to be able to hear all the chords. You can just hear the fact that there is a live mandolin in there, and it just adds so much to the piece. So that's a really little handy thing. Again, it's like, I'm amazed that it's so in tune, because half of these instruments I don't touch them for about 6 months, and then I'll come back randomly, oh, I could really use that one today. This is what it's all about. Got melodica, this hilarious... I'm getting sidetracked here, but look, I found this, and I think I bought this for £3. Haven't yet used it in a piece, but someday I will. And then we've got cases and light things down there, another guitar. Oh, and last but not least, hidden down under here, the French horn. I'll get back into playing it again for a while, and then I'll move somewhere like here where it's a bit too loud to play. But the thing is, I don't play it for several months, and then that makes the situation worse, because then when I do eventually pick it up again, it sounds like a cow mooing. And so I basically think, oh, well, I don't want people to be subjected to that, so I don't play it for even longer. So it's just an endless cycle of it not getting played. But when I do get back to playing it again, look how sticky the keys are. But when I do get back into playing it again, it is great fun. I did use it on a film soundtrack recently, but not on the EP, sadly. But I think that is about it. So that was all of the physical equipment that I use, but in terms of the VSTs, so the instruments on the computer that I work with, I use Spitfire most of the time now. Although when I started out I used East-West, as well as a quirky little company called Embertone, which make really nice solo instruments, worth checking out. But here's the thing, if you're just starting out in the industry and you want to buy yourself a VST, first VST, when you buy a single product, like any product, if it's good quality, it's likely to last longer. My advice would be, if you are buying your first library, rather than getting the whole orchestra for, say, however much your budget is, invest in one section. I'd recommend you start by getting strings, brass, woodwinds, and then anything else after that. Basically, because strings are the hardest to sample. It's not because I don't like woodwinds. Strings are the hardest to sample and the hardest to get sounding right. If you have a good sounding string section, you can kind of get away with everything else being a bit worse. That first library which I bought, which was the whole orchestra, all of it sounded fairly mediocre, and I don't use any of it these days. Whereas that East-West sample library which I bought, the second library, which was the Hollywood strings, much more expensive for what it was because it was only the one section, however I'm still using it to this day because it was better quality from the get-go. I mean, for the first, 5 years I think I was using inbuilt Logic instruments. I think it took me at least 3 or 4 years to actually even buy that first orchestra pack.
I mean, you spend such a long time honing how to make those Logic samples sound the best they can actually sound.
Yeah, good point.
And then eventually you would say to me, okay, I've got the most I can get out of these basic Logic samples. Now is the time where I think, I'm enjoying this, I want to commit to purchasing something a bit more superior. Master your tools, master the trade first, and get to know your equipment, and then once you've gained a love of it and skill for it, then I would suggest obviously potentially investing in, as you said, individual sections. I would certainly.
Dead on. Alright, so that's what we're working with here. Now let's move on to the fun stuff. A good album normally has an idea or a basic theme that the tracks are structured around. It should play out a bit like a story, with a beginning, a middle, an end, or a setup, conflict, and resolution. So in the case of Reprise EP, I kind of had a fairly good idea of what I wanted that initial concept to be. Obviously we're looking at orchestral pieces from around the 2012 to 2013 era of my life, back when I was a brony. Rory, would you be kind enough to tell the ladies and gentlemen what a brony is, please?
A brony, I believe, is someone who is a fan of the My Little Pony animated series. Am I not wrong?
You are not wrong.
I am not wrong. I am not particularly knowledgeable about the full fandom myself, but I know that everyone is wonderfully passionate about the story, the characters, and the world surrounding the series.
I think passionate's the right word in general, to be honest. And I think the biggest reason for me managing to continue doing this for so long was that in the beginning, when I first kind of got into that whole kind of thing, everyone was so supportive and encouraging, and just, even though the music was, compared to today, not that good, people still were saying, make more, make two of this. And that was what kind of inspired me to keep going. So I wanted this album to be a way of kind of saying thank you for all of that. I also wanted it to kind of acknowledge the fact that this was going to be a one-time revisitation, which is why I went for only 6 tracks in the end.
I think it's also a nice way of showing how far you've come. Obviously that's where you started all those years ago. You've done so much since then, and this is almost a tip of your hat. If I'm not wrong, you released it at the same time that the show ended, did you not?
Yes.
So it was very fitting, I think.
Yeah. So that was basically the concept, and the next thing to do was to decide what the track order was going to be. And as you know, last year I reached out to everyone asking what tracks people wanted to hear, as well as selecting a few of my own personal favourites to go along with it. It took a lot of time to narrow it down to which ones I wanted to do, and the track order, deciding that in itself, that took about 3 or 4 weeks. I kept changing it around. I knew that I wanted Octavia, because Octavia is so well liked, I thought it needs to be very significant. But in the context of the story, which I mentioned before, to me, Friendship is Magic made a perfect opening, Land of Equestria made a perfect ending. The next stage of writing is deciding how to translate it into new versions. Some people might know this, but Rory was actually there for many of the original tracks. Now, another one that's got a lot of fond memories with is To Build an Army.
Well, I would say we more wrote this one together, didn't we? More so than I featured in the other ones.
Out of all the old tracks that we're looking at, it was probably the most collaborative.
Yes, definitely.
Of the bunch.
You know what my favourite of the whole piece is? And this might surprise you. What do you think my favourite part of the whole piece, by the way?
Probably you were playing in it.
Screw you. It was actually in the first break. Much better before we just went first chorus, build up to the last chorus, and that was it.
Basically, my whole ethos was making big epic orchestral music. Got one big epic chorus here, got the final epic chorus there, which is even more epic. Everything else is kind of
Filler,
yeah, and it wasn't... I tried doing stuff. I mean, in the original, I wrote a little oboe line. That was my idea of being, clever. Was I write for woodwinds as well. I did an oboe line, but reality is like you're just doing this whilst copying and pasting the string chords underneath. Not very much creativity. So this middle section for this piece, I really wanted to take it. So this cor anglais, rather than the oboe, which has got the cor anglais, got a far more mellow sound, and by the looks of it, the bassoon is duetting with it or harmonising with it.
That's gorgeous.
And the other thing as well was that the build-up wasn't that bad in the original. The way it kind of built up, there was like a choir, but it was really high pitched and stuff. It was a bit odd sounding. This one, I wanted there to be something like, okay, this track is called To Build an Army. Let's get something kind of pretty badass in there to reflect that. A lot of the decisions I made when making these new versions, I've written things differently because I remember the emotions I was trying to capture in the original versions, but may have not done so completely successfully due to just lack of technical ability. Now that I've got a little bit more skill than I did then, I'm still aiming for the same emotions, but going about it maybe a way that I wouldn't have done so originally. Like this bit here, building up to the final chorus. It's not just the lack of ability, but also I think back then I was really pushing to get pieces out as fast as I could.
Yeah.
At one point, doing a piece of music a week. You can't do that and make something at the same quality as if you take 6 months to write it. It's just not going to happen. And a few people have mentioned in the new versions that they sound a bit busy and there's a bit too much going on, which I completely understand. The thing is, what I've done now is what I always wanted to do back then, I just didn't know how. So we're going to cut to a typical project of mine in action, giving you a brief overview of my general method of writing. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this version because last year I made a Writing Epic Battle Music, which is a 3-part series, about 40 odd minutes long, and that will tell you a lot more about my orchestration theory. So this is going to tell you everything you need to know, but it's going to be fairly basic because this is about the overall writing of the album, not the individual projects. You can see in this case that I started with a template like I often do, but if I know I'm going to be trying to create something more experimental or a different genre to what I normally work in, I will start a new project from scratch. My writing process normally pans out in one of two ways. The first is that I will write a piece of music on the piano with a relatively solid idea of what I want the final piece to sound like. I will then take the piano composition into Logic and methodically work through the orchestra, starting with the strings, brass, woodwinds, and then moving on to anything else after that. This doesn't happen too often, it's normally with ideas that are less abstract, but some examples would be The Calling featuring Claudia White, After the Rain, and Dance of the River Spirits. The second and definitely more common method is that I once again start on the piano, but with only a main theme, a riff, or any brief idea essentially. I start translating it into Logic, feeling my way through the composition by experimentation, trying out different sounds, instruments, and adding more musical ideas as I go. I'll try and keep it relatively simple at this stage and get to the end of the project before adding any really fine details, because more often than not, there can be drastic changes that will result in the material getting replaced. Once I'm sure that the project is laid out how I want it and sounds close to what I'm after, I'll start going through and adding details, things like chimes, reversed cymbals, that kind of thing, and finish it off by recording any live instruments that I can realistically fit into the piece if I haven't planned in advance for them. That's the general workflow, but beyond this, your style should be something that is unique to you as much as possible. A piece of advice that I've heard and really like is that you start to create something truly unique when you combine 3 completely contrasting influences of yours into one new style. Obviously, Reprise EP was a little bit different as I was working from pre-existing ideas, but I tried my best to refer to the original projects as little as possible and go from memory, which allowed me to be less restricted in how I interpreted them. I wanted this album to be a reprise, not a remaster. So once I've done all of that, I'll generally then have at that point a rough version, which I can send out to family and friends to critique and get their opinions on, and if it's all good, I'll then send it out to featuring or potentially featuring artists to listen to. I find that generally if I'm reaching out to musicians, it just makes a better impression if you've got something tangible to show them, rather than sort of vaguely saying, oh, would you be interested in being in a track? So that's generally my first part of the workflow. Then it's time for the next step. So what you want to be doing now is finding artists to feature in your music. For me personally, I'll start out with people I know, if there's someone who I know that's right for the job, and following that, I'll then start trying other things, such as a fantastic suggestion I had from a good friend of mine to try out a Facebook page that was based around the city of Bristol, nearby to where we are, and basically allowed me to put up a post saying I'm looking for musicians that play these instruments, can anybody put me in touch? And I was absolutely amazed at how good the response was to that. Generally, I find that there'll be someone knows someone who plays the violin, someone who knows someone who... It's not that uncommon. If you really are in the middle of the sticks, then it is worth hunting around on YouTube to find other artists and asking them, but only do that if you really have to.
But generally musicians know other musicians who will know another musician. It's just a world of networking. I was with Marcus a little while ago and you mentioned that you wanted to redo Octavia, and he expressed a keen interest in wanting to do most of the key solo instruments live. For obvious reasons, they sound more authentic, they sound better. Then he said, I don't really know any cellists, and from studying music at university in Chichester, I thought, I know a very lovely cellist called Bryony. I didn't know where she lived now, because it's been a while since I've talked to the person, and I thought, this is the only cellist I can think of. I've still got her details on Facebook, I believe it was. Let's get in touch with her and see if she wants to come and play. And I remember you saying a bit like, oh, will she want to play? Will she want to? Most people, if you express an interest in their skill set and you say, I'm writing this beautiful piece of music, I think your playing is wonderful, would you like to come and play? Most of the time, they're going to say yes. And of course, Bryony was very kind and graced us with her cello playing, and it was absolutely beautiful. She did a wonderful job.
They want to play on the track, so the next thing I normally do is send some sheet music. And when I say sheet music, I mean it in the most rudimental sense. So I've completely forgotten how to do most of the stuff we learned at school. But I find that if you just get the basics down on paper, the notes and the rhythm, which you can pick up fairly easily, musicians are pretty good at working out the rest for themselves. And even if they're not entirely sure what to do, you just have a video chat with them and discuss it. And basically you can iron out everything you want to do. If they want to learn it by ear, then you can always send them a piano MIDI file, or just put in a VST over the track which they can follow. I mean, even when you do all of that, I found that when I met the musicians in person and they played it through in front of me for the first time, it sounded completely different to how I was expecting. But that's part of the whole idea of collaboration. It's talking and going back and forth. And the most important thing is that you'll find musicians can give you a lot of creative input of their own, which might improve your piece in ways that you hadn't even thought it would improve. I mean, Rory has taken quite a lot of creative charge over this project, so he's so enthusiastic when he gets around to recording, and when I say enthusiastic, I mean 30 takes enthusiastic. It means that we end up with things that I wouldn't even know about. So
I think that's where being open is really important. If you have a musician come to play with you and they play it in a certain way and you go, no thank you, it was meant to be played like this. No, that's the worst thing you could do. You want to listen to ideas they've come up with, because they could be absolute gold dust. And as you say, change tracks, make them better, and at the very least you can go, that's a lovely idea, but I think actually I would rather it this way.
And we put it down. And I remember you said to me, oh, it sounded like you slipped up on one of the notes. I went, oh, it's just a grace note. I had completely messed it up. It was completely unintentional. But you brought it down a sync, so it made it into the original track. You could hear it. It goes. And I played it off as a grace note, and it's still in the track, and I'm very proud. I'm tempted to put it in again this time, just to see if you noticed.
The part that you then got to do is the paperwork, talking about what specifically is going to be recorded and the price, which is going to vary hugely depending on the musician who's playing, the musician who's recording, what's happening with the track, where it's going to be published. And I'll generally, if I can help it, try and go for one upfront payment rather than doing a royalty share, just simply because there's so much paperwork that's involved with doing royalties and all that kind of thing. But again, it's a very circumstance-specific thing. Just make sure that you have it down and you have it down in writing. I also like to keep paper copies. Maybe that's a bit old-fashioned of me, but it just means that it's all there and you don't need to worry about it in the future.
I think one of the most important things with the whole paperwork side of things is really transparent. Musicians that are playing with you and featuring on your music, they know precisely what they're being paid. You know what you're getting from them, which is really important. And I think amongst sort of the musician network of people that you will get to know and meet, it looks really professional. Because musicians like to talk. So I'll say something, oh, I played on Marcus's track the other day, did some flute playing, it was wonderful, I got paid. People will talk. So I think certainly, although it may seem more tedious when you do it for the first time, in the long run, I think it really does pay off, and I think it's very much worth it, indeed.
I think it's a really good precedence to keep yourself as well, because if you keep yourself professional from the get-go, and even if you'd be like, oh, I don't need to do this because I'm just starting out, I don't need to be as professional, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I think if you be professional and do everything by the book from the start, it's really good practice to get into as well, because you treat yourself properly, so everyone else will.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. Just good practice.
Yeah.
And what's lovely is we're recording, so we can put that in.
Yeah, that's So we went through the recording equipment earlier. Obviously, we're going to show you a quick clip. Bryony's actually coming back at the end of this month, as we are recording this, to record for another piece of music which I'm currently writing. But basically, we're going to show you that setup, which is very simple. So if we come through here, we've got this extremely long extension cord, which is just a USB-B cable, which I got on eBay, to get the interface all the way out here into the quiet room. This is our talent. This is Bryony on the cello, and we have the Shure SM57 on the mic stand, XLR cable, all that malarkey. The lighting setup doesn't normally happen when I'm recording, but for the purposes of the video, I felt it was included. And then back in Logic, I've got a special session set up just to record audio. So I don't record audio into the main project if I can help it, because then it gets really cluttered, because there's already like 100 tracks, so you don't want any more. So I'll have a separate new clean project just to record the takes in, sort through them in this separate project, and then bring it into the master. Right, let's do it. In the actual piece that she played in Octavia, Bryony actually recorded all of that remotely from where she is based in Doncaster and sent it via email. We did the entire process from start to finish using video chat and just back and forths on iMessage. So it just goes to show what is possible even without having even met the musician in person before.
It's quite different. It's a different style of playing. When you're in an orchestra and in a section, everything has to be quite uniform. Whereas when you get to do projects like this and get to play as a soloist, you kind of get to, it's a different mindset, it's a different way of playing. You get a bit more freedom to kind of express and do things differently and put different tones and colours in. Whereas especially in orchestra, it's all very specific, it's all written down. But it's nice, it's a nice change. Artistic freedom is really important, but also having a composer knowing exactly what they want, allowing the artistic freedom, because sometimes the best things that I've ever done, it's come out of just being like, oh, well, that was good. Oh, what did you do there? recording does take a long time. It can be quite a hefty process. So having the conciseness of what you want in a way enables more efficiency, which is good. But also having artistic freedom is also very, so like, you know, because you don't know what's going to happen. Something amazing, that's the beauty of music, like something incredible could happen that you haven't planned for, but actually it's better than what originally happened.
Yes,
so
exactly.
yeah, which is, yeah.
Yeah, so there's two vocalists in this piece. They did a cover of Land of Equestria last year. There's a guy called Matt who's based in the States, and you know, I don't actually know what the other guy's name is, but his name on YouTube is Sterling Fusion. So it's Sterling Fusion and Silvernote, these two artists from the fandom, who did this really amazing cover of my track last year, and it was a very different style, but it kept the feeling of the original, which is cool. But I really like the vocals, and I reached out to them saying, do you want to collaborate on this?
That's nice.
And they agreed, but I think they're both a bit busy at the moment, so we weren't talking about re-recording anything. Matt sent me over the stems to the vocal tracks, and with a little bit of tuning, changing some of the notes here and there, they fitted in really well, and it's just like an extra layer, extra dimension, which the original didn't have. And then we've got Charles Van Harrison on the violin. Charles Van Harrison, his name's not Charles Van Harrison. No, we've got Charles Evan Harrison. I don't think he uses his middle name, it's just in his website, so it's kind of ingrained in my head. So Charles Harrison plays the violin here.
I like that slide.
That Scotch slide.
That Scotch slide was lovely.
The violin player and viola player both came here to record, and that was also a very fun experience in both cases. Though that being said, we were a bit pressed for time with the violin playing, we had to really rush through it. But during both sessions it was a lot of fun and ended up with really good sounding things. And for all of this EP, from start to finish, I used the Shure SM57. I used the NT1A for Land of Equestria, and I actually recorded the main part of the vocals for that at my grandparents'. I then came back, listened to the first verse and realised that it was not very good at all, re-recorded it from scratch at 5 a.m. in the morning because I didn't want to have any of the traffic outside of here. So this is the kind of workarounds that you need to do when working with live instruments, even if you don't have a typical recording space. Do you know, the funny thing about this piece, compared to the others, is that back then I didn't really know anything about the fact that like violins always get the melody and the violas don't. So I just wrote it because I wanted the melody to be low down, and I didn't think the cello was right, and I didn't think the violin was right.
You should definitely write more viola stuff.
I think everyone should.
Yeah, me too.
So how do you make a few musicians sound like an orchestra of 100? You get creative. I said to Rory, let's record you 4 times, layer it up and it'll sound like a choir if we put the VST underneath. What do we end up with?
Well, it is partly because I insist on doing 40 takes of everything. So there's 40 versions of me singing. You can't really replicate a choir with 2 people, so what Marcus and I sort of figured out was best to do was to record me singing the bass line, which you can hear at the start of Star Swirl the Bearded, singing it through once, singing it through again and again, but varying each take just a little bit, whether it be the vowels I was singing or slight inflections, putting it here and there. Because there's no point doing the same take 40 times because it will still sound like one person. And then we realised that just through how I sing, I breathed in certain places throughout the phrases, and in real choirs what they do to make sure no one could be heard breathing is they do something called staggered breathing, just when someone might breathe a little bit earlier so they can carry on while someone else is breathing. So we did a few different takes using that technique, so it sounded like there was always voices singing. We layered all the tracks on top of each other so it sounds like there's 40 versions of me, and there's some of your vocals on top as well, I believe.
I'm in there twice.
Yes, indeed.
I gave up very early on.
So it sounds very ominous and sounds like there's lots of us singing together. And it's so simple and it works so well. We've used it for years.
In terms of recording, if you can get any sound at all into your piece, it doesn't need to be anything too grand. As long as there's a living, breathing thing in your music, it will just take this orchestral piece, which is entirely technology, and make it something that's actually living and breathing. And like you said, we did whoos and ha's, we did breaths, stomps and claps and monkeys, shouts, all of that was included. Basically, it didn't mean that the piece was then loads different as a result of having it in there, but it was just that little extra bit that made everything somehow feel more real.
When Marcus made this album, or these songs originally, I suggested that because it's very dum, dum, cha, dum, that sort of rhythm, that it would sound cool to have sort of voices going hoo, ha. So Marcus then painstakingly gathered together about 40 barbarian Scottish men who came to his house, and they, I'm impressed we actually got them to fit in your bedroom. Nope, it's Marcus and myself thinking that we're really cool, next to a microphone going,
What have we been thinking?
we are really cool. Woo! And we overdubbed ourselves a few times to make it sound like more voices.
Not even. We didn't even go to that much effort. We recorded in ourselves going, and we did that for, I think we did it for 8 bars, took the 4 bars for the second half, and then put them underneath the first 4 bars. We copied and pasted them, swapped the sides so that it sounded different to the first time round, and then that was it. This time around, I went slightly further because I then took that, duplicated that, and then pitch shifted these new 2 tracks down a little bit. So it's not quite so impressive about the reverb.
Oh my god, we sound so young.
Oh yes, and then I'm gonna add in the new 2 tracks with the pitch shift. Even without reverb, these guys sound a little bit more. Oh, you can hear that's like makes us sound a bit more manly. And then of course,
I like that little yeah.
that was you. You had to do that. You couldn't just I said, just do the hoo-has now, and you're like, I'm gonna really give it my all on this one. These guys won't know what ha hit them. And so, so yeah, everybody has to go. We were recording. I was just like, stop trying to be clever. So you can hear all of those together. So pretty good. Can bring them up a tiny bit.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh god, don't ever say yes in front of me again, Rory. You can have a soloist standing out above the rest of the orchestra, you can blend them in with an entire section, or you can do a few effects. Basically, as long as you have one microphone, and it could even be the microphone on your iPhone, it will just do so much for you. It's worth using it in any way you can. So it's the 14th of October, and basically I'm doing the mastering for Reprise EP, which I need to get finished pretty soon because in 1 week I'm heading out to Scotland for a family holiday, and when I get back it'll only be about a week before the album's release. So basically what I need to do is send this away to the distributors before I go, so then it's done and it will definitely get there on time. I'm going to run you through my mastering process, but firstly, what actually is mastering? Essentially, this is putting the final polish on the track before you send it out into the world, and in the case of an album or an EP, it's bringing all the tracks together so that they're consistent and you don't have to adjust the volume throughout the album, that kind of thing. If you listen to a traditional classical album, you'll find that most of the time they don't even really bother with this stage because, more often than not, the original composer's intention was to create this heightened sense of emotion through soaring loud parts and very quiet lows, because the contrast resonates with us, especially when hearing it live. But the thing is, in the modern world, I don't think this works quite so well for most other genres, because people aren't really sitting in quiet rooms listening to the gramophone anymore, and they're certainly not seeing orchestras live as much anymore. So you want to be able to create a piece of music which can be heard clearly from start to finish, even if someone's on a bus, or on their way to work in the car, etc. In my case, what I do for an album is export all of the tracks out of their mix projects and bring them together into a final master project. The first thing I'll do is analyse the track and make sure there's no clicks or pops or crackles. In this stage, it's all about the sound, listening very closely for specifics, and it can get very long-winded very quickly. These two tracks underneath the main track here are buses. What that means is the track is being sent out to both of these buses at the same time, essentially duplicating the track. One track doesn't alter the sound at all, and the other track has a compressor on it. Now, a compressor brings those levels that I mentioned together, and in this case it's a multi-band compressor. So I've got this segment here which is a compressor just for the bass, and if I solo it and make sure this other track's muted, we can hear that's the spectrum of the audio file that it's working on, and it's the same for these other ones going up to this highest one here, which is just the very utmost treble. The reason I use a multi-band compressor rather than just compressing the whole signal is that it gives a more nuanced sound and more creative control, and so I will play this compressed version of the track alongside an unaltered version on a different bus, but at a slightly lower level. This is called parallel compression, and basically it's compensating for the track that's squashed down and removing those really loud parts. You have the original track next to it to make up for that, so you've still got that sense of scale. But at the same time, having the compressed track next to it brings up the quiet sections and evens out the volume level throughout the track without it sounding squashed. Here's what the track sounds like without the compressor. And here's what it sounds like with. This whole process is sequential, so you've got the original track, which you then send out to two buses at the same time. So we split the track into two identical things, compress one, keep the other original, and then by sending both those buses to a new bus, it's kind of bringing them back together at the end there to work on them and do the final effects. My hand might have gone out the screen there, but basically I drew a shape that's kind of like that. This new bus is all the effects that I now want to add to the compressed track. The first thing is EQ, so the bass, mids and treble. You can see here that I've scooped out a little bit around this lower mid section, left the bass and taken off the very, very low end. The next plugin which I use is the stereo spread, and this is taking the signal and pushing it out left and right based on what frequency it's at. It is a very subtle difference, but it is noticeable. The next stage is to limit the track. What is limiting? Essentially, it's bringing up the level of the entire track to a threshold, normally minus 0.1 dB for commercial music, which is the loudest a track can be before it makes that crackly distortion noise. But however, what this does is actually bring up any waveforms that are underneath this. These bits obviously do get louder, which creates a louder perceived volume. I find that when I add the limiter to the track, it actually brings out instruments that I hadn't heard before because of those low signals. And at this stage, I'll then start to go back to the original project to make adjustments to certain instruments, to bass and treble, of percussion, brass, all that kind of thing. And for me, this back and forthing happens many, many times. In the case of Octavia, I think I went through no less than 17 versions before settling on the final master, simply because when you go back into the original project and bring down an instrument, you'll then compress the track in the master and suddenly another instrument gets brought up louder because of that whole process. So it's just one of those things that you have to deal with. I'm a perfectionist and I like to get it ironed out. Again, like the mixing stage, my mastering process is something that's constantly evolving. My personal opinion is at the moment I tend to master songs way too loud. The orchestral genre doesn't really need it to be cranked up, but it's all part of that whole loudness wall thing. There's this stigma that you need to make your music loud in order to grab people's attention, and yes, that's certainly true, but at the same time my music didn't used to be quite so loud and it's still got people listening. So look up several different techniques from different people, see what works for you personally. The next stage, of course, is sending it out to your friends and family, again, if they're not bored of you by this point, to get them to critique it. Everyone listen to it on as many different devices, speakers, in the car. Rory was really helpful. He listened to it in the car on his way to work, which is very generous, and also on a good pair of headphones and a bad pair of headphones. Whatever you can get your hands on to hear the music through, because It's not a case of saying, oh, it sounds brilliant through this £10 pair of headphones. It's just a case of saying, oh, through this £10 pair of headphones, suddenly that instrument sounds really loud, or something like that. Let me check it on the main mix, and suddenly you'll notice something that you didn't realise was there before. I then won't listen to it at all for an entire week. This basically gives my ears a chance to refresh themselves, and when I come back it's almost like I'm hearing it for the first time again, because after a few days, I find personally that it all starts to merge into one, and it's very difficult to hear whether you're improving it or not. The most important thing about all of this is take your time. I actually googled at one point how long it takes to master a track, because for me, in Reprise EP, I spent about 1 week per track, going through, doing little tweaks, going back to the original project, making small changes. I then looked it up online, and according to some forums, it should take you 2 hours to master a track. Now, if you master a track in 2 hours, please reach out to me, because I want to know how it's done that quickly. Especially in orchestral music, when there's so many little tiny things which can all add up to make a big difference in the mix. I don't know, for me personally, I can't do it in any less than 4 days. But don't rush it, make sure that you get as many opinions on it as you can, and take your time. So you have a folder full of WAV files and it's time to send it to the World Wide Web. What do you do next? Well, if you haven't done it already, good album artwork is an absolute must, because if people haven't heard your music before, this is the first impression they will get of it. So if you can't do artwork yourself using any programs like Photoshop or GIMP, then you can always reach out to people who might be artistic, people that you know. Again, it's very similar to hiring a musician. People that you know in person, putting out an advert on any Facebook pages. Actually, one of my friends from university uses Fiverr for his artwork. It's definitely more of a minimalist look, but considering it's not very much money, it's certainly acceptable results.
I think the album artwork is just another extension of what you want to say with your music. So it's like something that's going to be personal to you and something that just says the message that you want your music to say as well.
Big time.
Damn, son! Do you want to come and sit here instead?
I mean, Sid's dead right. If you make the music, you take the photograph, you put it all together, it can but be an expression of yourself.
It's you that you're presenting to the world, so make the effort to make that first impression as a whole, and even the dumb things like profile pictures and all that kind of thing. Take the time to make it professional. If you've got photographer friends, reach out to them to give you a hand. Basically all you can do to make this image of yourself, because that's what people are ultimately going to see. So once you've got that, it's time to start looking at distribution. So we look at a distribution company. I use CD Baby personally. I find that their process is very simple, but really any of them, because they're all the same kind of thing basically. After that, you need to get in touch with a PRO. What is a PRO? Performance Rights Organisation. So basically you upload your music to them or tell them what your music is, and then when people want to license your music for commercial use such as television and broadcast, as well as online use, they can simply get in touch with that PRO, and that PRO will give you the money. After that, personally, what I like to do is upload my music to AdRev. Now, AdRev is one company out of quite a few that basically take your music and then they detect that audio file in people's YouTube videos. So if someone uses your music without permission, or even with permission but they don't want to pay for monetization, basically what this does is it puts an advert on your behalf on that video and allows you to make a few pennies. And we are talking pennies here. It really isn't very much at all. I find that one of the most helpful things about it is the fact that it gives me a list of all the videos my music has been used in, and by golly, there's some funny ones. But just in general, being able to have that little bit of creative control on YouTube. And the thing is, if people really don't want you to claim the video, or they want to license it from you, or that you want to come to agreement with them, some channels have got quite a few more subscribers, they might provide an audience for you, but should all else fail, at least there's AdRev there to do the music claiming on your behalf, because there's no way that once your music gets out there, it's out there, and you're not going to be able to keep on track of all of it. There's another website called TuneSat, which does a very similar thing, but for TV. A little bit hit and miss, but also very cool to see that my music's been used on quite a few Italian TV programmes, it seems. Not really much I can do about it, but the thing is I now know that it's there, and occasionally I'll see something that's actually quite good to use as part of a show reel. So TuneSat is also very good for that, or I think there's another website called SoundMouse. So once you've done all of that and got your album artwork, you can put the artwork and the music together, make a video and put it on YouTube. That's all I did for the first few years, and pretty much all I'm doing now, just with a little bit more flair added to it. Build up hype leading up to the release. So send your music out to the music channels that are relevant to the genre you're working in. So in this case, it's probably going to be those big epic music channels, the likes of Epic Music World, all of those places that have an audience that are likely to hear your music and it apply to them. I've tried doing Facebook advertising in the past. It's never really done anything for me. It's easier just to send your music out to people, and even if they don't respond, at least it's not for lack of trying. And the reason I mention this is because when you do this, make sure you put the effort into actually contacting people for good specific reasons. Do not ever start an email with "hi there." Make the effort to find out what a person's name is. If you're going to ask them to publish your music or share it onto their YouTube channel or post it on a Spotify playlist, find out what their name is at the very least. Tell them why you like their channel or their playlist, and then make the effort of saying why you think your music should be on there. Basically, even if they can't help you or they don't want to, if nothing else, you give off a nice good feeling.
Messaging YouTube channels about sharing your music, even if they say no, you are now in their mind. You're in their repertoire. So if they think, oh, I fancy doing this. Oh, I remember that bloke Marcus Warner messaged me a few months ago. I wonder if he's still available for music. You know, it's a win-win situation for you as a musician. Even if you message potentially quite larger corporations, larger channels, places which are much bigger than you, you'd be surprised what you can get back. And again, you lose nothing for trying. Be proud of what you've made, put it out there, see what you get back.
Share consistently across all social media platforms. Facebook, I'm not really a fan of Facebook, but just make sure that it's all covered, because there will be people on those platforms that aren't necessarily on others. And it's just, you're not hurting your chances by posting it everywhere you can. My general schedule for announcing an album is 1 month in advance, 1 week in advance, 2 days, tomorrow, and it's available. Here's something that I've learned recently, and it's taken me 7 years to get my thick head around this. Sid, zoom in on me because this is important. Do not make promises on the release date of an album if you don't know that you can keep to it.
Have you broken that promise a few times?
Every single album bar Liberation, simply because I didn't announce Liberation ahead. Actually, I think I might have done. But no, every single album after Liberation. It was not until Reprise EP when I realised that I should basically get the album mostly finished before even mentioning the fact that I was working on an album, because it makes the whole process so much less stressful. And with that in mind, it is time for my conclusion. Writing an orchestral album can be quite a lengthy process and a lot of hard work, but it is possible to achieve great results if you put the time in, get creative, and overall tell a good story. For the techie stuff, most of the resources you need to learn are online, and the best way to improve is through practice. But most importantly, if you're passionate about this and love music, none of this should be a problem for you, because if you're doing something that you love, then it won't ever feel like work. We're going to wrap this up by answering a few questions that some fans had during the premiere of the album, and also we asked you guys to post on Instagram any questions that you might have, so we'll have a look at that now and see what you have to say. But otherwise, thank you for watching, hope this was of some use to you, and we'll see you in the next video.
I got another message from Instagram through mdu.ig. What's the song you enjoyed working on the most? Plus, what instrument or library is the twangy guitar sound at the start of To Build an Army?
Well, twangy guitar sound, hopefully we'll have covered that when we shot our instrument section. It's the little mini harp which I've got next door. And as for the song that I enjoyed singing, was it enjoyed making or enjoyed singing the most? Sorry.
Enjoyed working on the most.
Enjoyed working on the most. Ooh. Land of Equestria if it wasn't vocals. I hated working on my own vocals, but I loved everything else. But overall, my favourite to work on was Friendship is Magic.
I would say it's probably because you're more self-criticising of your own vocals. Would you say so?
That's very kind of you, but they're also really bad.
A question from D-Jazz. Which movie editor do you use?
DaVinci Resolve. Used to be Final Cut Pro, but I've decided I don't like it.
A question from SF Character Sketches. Is this your favourite music style?
It depends on what mood I'm in. Depends on what I'm listening to. Most of the time, yes.
A question from Peaches1202. How is your voice so soothing and nice to listen to?
It's because we're British.
Our next question from The Crew Is Enough. Will there be a physical copy of this sale?
Oh, I don't know. I was thinking about it, but every time I've mentioned it, there just hasn't seemed to be enough interest to warrant it. Because the thing is, it's only 6 tracks, so if you order it, you'd have to pay something like $15 to $20 for the CD, and for 6 tracks, it's it's not very good value. I wouldn't really feel good selling that to someone. So maybe the next album.
Now, a question from Universal. In the past, you made liquid drum and bass. Will you do something like that again, or in the future?
Ooh, maybe. It would involve having to do quite a lot of time to kind of get back into it, kind of thing, because it's like a different... The actual production of the beat itself is a big thing in and of itself. So being able to, yeah, I have to get back into practice, basically.
A question from Regan Games. What got you into making brony music in the first place?
Oh, actually, do you know what? I wish Jim was here, because he actually played a video. We were at Charlie Saunders' party once, and Jim and Ben Davey played a video at Charlie Saunders' party, and it had Rainbow Dash in it, and there was some like rock song to it, like Chemical Romance or some kind of like fast-paced.
It's Offspring's Show Me How to Love.
Yes, that.
That is one on my phone.
Yes, I saw that, and that made me go, wait, what's all this about then? That's what this was like. I'm intrigued. Brilliant. It all went from there. Jim, if you're watching this, you and Ben Davey are solely responsible, again.
For your whole music career.
Yeah, literally, they were responsible for showing me Two Steps from Hell for the first time, showing me Faint, as in the artist Faint, for the first time, which is a drum and bass artist, showing me Bronyism for the first time. All three of those instances happened at Charlie Saunders' house.
A question from Hanny G. Any way to get the sheet music for First Flight? I'm assuming she means the piano score.
Yes, yeah. We've got plans to actually do a music book in the future, so like a kind of combination of the actual piano pieces and then piano renditions of some of my more popular orchestral works. Not entirely sure when that's going to come out, but when it does, I'm going to make sure that that's going to be a nice thing that you can buy, then that'll have everything you need in it. So stay tuned.
I got a question from Creative Artsy Girl. How long did this take y'all to create? With an apostrophe and everything.
From the very beginning, the first track I think I started was back in February. So bearing in mind I've been doing other projects throughout this year, I'd say grand total, if we were to say that I worked every single day, 3 to 4 months.
Question from 11 to Go Forever. How did you pick the Evening Star songs for the EP? Was it by popularity or something else? Question mark.
Something else would be the answers that people gave me to the Time to Talk About Evening Star video last year, and just what I've seen people commenting on over the years. But yeah, it was also personal choice, I'm not going to lie.
Does Rory have any questions?
Rory, do you have any questions?
Do I have any questions? Are there any, looking forward into the future, obviously I know it's hypothetical because you don't know what music you'll be writing, are there any live instruments that you would like to be able to record / put into your future pieces? Be it a bagpipe or a harp, you know. What sort of instruments would you like to at some point to be able to record into your music?
Hurdy-gurdy and an air violin.
It's the most Marx answer I've ever heard.
Hurdy-gurdy, I love.
I remember when you were thinking about making your own hurdy-gurdy.
Yeah.
Because you wanted one and you couldn't find one anyway. You were like, I'm just going to make one.
If you play the hurdy-gurdy, get in touch.
Hit this man up. Oh my god, can you get busking with the hurdy-gurdy? I just want to see you sat there. Just.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.
Cheers everyone.
Bye-bye. Oh yeah, can you pass me? I'm going to have a quick sip.
We need to keep our beautiful camera woman fueled.
Definitely.
You're still flashing.
I mean, this is an interesting modern art piece that we've got going on now.
Sorry, I didn't realise you were...
down up here like this.
It's very stubborn.
I need to get a haircut.
No, I've got
again.
it. I've legit got it.
I'm going to be talking, it's going to go... So generally, if they are interested, I'll then... I should probably respond to that, shouldn't I? That's wonderful. So...
He'd done this massive thing and you were just like, right, yep.
That's true, yeah.
You get the music that you wanted off your...
I then won't listen to it at all for an entire week. This then gives my for God's sake. I then won't... For it to get to the end... I like how shit doesn't speed up either. It makes us wait. It's punishment.
I think you should looked back through this stuff and see how many times you can catch Rory burping. So.
It's like,
It's a slight constipated look. That's
You just get the like bullfrog neck.
Guys, come on, let's get to the end. We're on the last page. Oh.
Hold on, give me a sec.
Dude, you've got tears around your eyes. God's sake. So build up hype leading up to release. I'm struggling to say it now.
The hype train out the station.
1 week before release, 2 days, tomorrow, it's on. It's available. You do some creative zooms there, I like that.
so there you have it.
Yeah.
These are the few basic steps of making an album.
Yeah.
Through the production, the prep, the people you know, the people you work with, how you can touch those people, and then how you go forward in the industry, and then how you go forward in the artwork world, and then the photography world.
You two, keep it together, please.
You're there.
Not detached, just with less slides. Still legato and beautiful, but. What on earth? Oh, great, okay. This happens occasionally. ScreenFlow just decides it's going to fuck me over.